Good morning, students. Hope all of you are fine. Beta, this lecture is also in continuation of revision of chapter 10, and name of the chapter is Colonialism and the Countryside. Beta, in previous lecture we discussed about the Zamindar resist and the fifth report, and the today's topic is the hoe and the plow. As you know, beta, hoe is a agriculture equipment that is used to dig the soil, and plowing that is used to dig the deep soil while doing farming activities. So beta, basically this topic is related to the shifting cultivators and the settled cultivators. This is about the conflicts between these two, uh, the people or the tribes that used to do that practice shifting cultivation, and the settled cultivators. So, this topic, in this we will know about that when the frontiers of the peasant economy expanded outwards, swallowing up pastures and the forest in the Rajmahal hills, then what happened? As you know, at that time, the main source of revenue was land tax, agriculture tax. So that is why now these British people, they just wanted to expand more area under cultivation, and that is why they were just acquiring the shifting land or the pasture land. They were making it cultivable. So in this topic we will read about all this, and the topic is the first subtopic that is mentioned. It is the in the hills of Rajmahal, right? Like in the early 19th century, Buchanan, he was the Francis physician who came to India and served in the Bengal medical service, and he was the surgeon to the Governor General of India, Lord Wellesley. And that is why, on the request of the government of Bengal, he undertook detailed surveys of the areas under the jurisdiction of British East India Company. That is why he visited this place. So Buchanan, he travelled through the Rajmahal hills, and from his description the hills appeared impenetrable. It means impenetrable means that people hardly visit that area, or a zone where few travellers ventured, and that area was signified the danger also. So wherever Buchanan went, people were hostile, apprehensive of officials, and unwilling to talk to them. It means the behavior towards them was not cooperative. And even Buchanan's journal gives us tantalizing glimpses of these hills folk in the early 19th century, and his journal was written as a diary of places he visited, like the travelogue. People he encountered and practices he saw, it raises questions in our mind but doesn't always help us answer them. Means why those people's behavior was like this. So it tells us about a moment in time but not about the longer stories. So just to know about that, why the people were behaving like this, so if we look at the late 18th century revenue records, we learn that these hill folk were known as Pahadiyas. They lived around the Rajmahal hills, subsisting on forest produce and practicing shifting cultivation. Beta, this hill folk, basically the people who were the native of these Rajmahal hills, they were known as Pahadiyas, and they were dependent upon the forest produce, and they practices the shifting cultivation. And shifting cultivation, you know that they cleared patches of forest by cutting bushes and burning the undergrowth, and on these patches enriched by the potash from the fertilizer that they used for this land, that was the ash. That is why it was known as the burn and slash cultivation also. So, and these paharias, they grew a variety of pulses and millets for consumption, and they scratched the ground lightly with hose like I was telling you, beta, this hose was the equipment that was used by these paharias people. So they just scratch means वो उसको deep dig नहीं करते थे, right? So they cultivated the land for few years and then left it fallowing, left it for resting so that it could recover its fertility, and then they moved to a new area. And even from these forests they collected mahua is a flower beta, for they collected it for food, silk cocoons and resin for sale, and wood for charcoal production. And the undergrowth that was spread like a mat below the trees, so the patches of the grass that covered the lands left fallow provided pasture for cattle. Undergrowth hota hai, you must have seen that under trees sometimes some shrubs or grass grow itself, so that was used as a pasture for their cattle. And the life of these Paharias people, they were as hunters, shifting cultivators, food gatherers, charcoal producers, and silkworm rearers. So it means all these activities done by them, those were connected to the forest. So that is why the forest was very much important for them. They lived in hutments within tamarind groves and rested in the shade of mango trees. Means they just built the huts over there, and they considered the entire region as their land. And the basis of their identity as well as survival, and they resisted. So it means the forest was their identity as well as it was their survival also. Means they were totally dependent on the forest. So that is why they resisted the intrusion of the outsiders. It means they didn't like any kind of interference in their area. And their chiefs maintained the unity of the group, settled disputes, and led the tribes in battles with other tribes and plains people. So beta, every time these tribes, they have their chieftain. उनके chief होते थे जो जिनके whose responsibility was to maintain the unity in the group and just to settle down disputes. And sometimes these disputes were among the different tribes, और sometimes with the plain people also, जो हमारे cultivated, जो settled cultivators से, they were known as the plains people, जो plain area में रहते थे, right? So with their base in the hills, the Paharias regularly raided the plains where settled agricultures lived. Now why they raided? Why these Paharias people, they raided or they attacked the settled agriculture? Because beta, these raids were necessary for their survival, particularly in the year of the scarcity. Sometimes there was a shortage of food, so that is why it was a way just to put power over settled communities. And they were a means of negotiating political relations with outsiders. The zamindar on the plains had to often purchase peace by paying a regular tribute to hill chiefs. Whenever any zamindar want any land on the hill, then they had to pay a tribute. And traders similarly gave a small amount to the hill folk for permission to use the passes controlled by them. As you know, so many ways, so many passes that passes through these hills. So whosoever traveler has to go through these hills, that had to give some money. So all these hilly areas, hilly passes, those were controlled by these tribes. And once the toll was paid, the Paharias chiefs protected the traders, ensuring that their goods were not plundered by anyone. So once they entered the forest after paying the toll, so then it was the responsibility of these tribes to protect them. And this negotiated peace was somewhat fragile, means it was very delicate. It broke down in the last decades of the 18th century when the frontiers of settled agriculture were being aggressively extended in eastern India. Now beta, these settled agriculture, they were extending their frontiers towards the Rajmahal hills. So this created unrest in this area, and the British encouraged forest clearance. As you know, British, they just wanted to establish or develop so many industries. That is why they encourage the forest clearance. And zamindar and jotdar, they turned uncultivated lands into rice fields. As you know, in previous topic we have read, if any person was bringing the wasteland into cultivable land, that person was getting concession, tax concession from the company. So, to the British, extension of settled agriculture was necessary to enlarge the sources of land revenue. As you know, all the income it came from land revenue only. So, even that is why they just wanted to increase produce crops for export and establish the basis of a settled ordered society. And they also associated forest with wildness and saw forest people as savage, unruly, primitive and difficult to govern. Beta, for this British people, they just wanted the settled community, so that just to tax collection will be easy for them. And for them, these tribes, these moving tribes or nomads people, they just look at them like they were the primitive, and it is very difficult for the British people to govern them. So that is why now they want the settled people. That is why they were against this shifting cultivation. So they felt that forest had to be cleared, settled agriculture established, and forest people tamed, civilized and persuaded to give up hunting and take to plow agriculture. So now these British people, वो क्या चाहते थे कि जो ये nomads people हैं या जो ये tribes हैं राजमहल हिल्स की, वो क्या हो जाए, they just turned up to the settled agriculturist and they give up hunting, और वो क्या है, वो प्लो एग्रीकल्चर को प्रमोट करना चाहते थे. So as settled agriculture expanded, the area under forest and pastures contracted. Obviously, the land piece is same. If we are using that land for agriculture purposes, that is why the forest and pasture area that was decreasing now. And this sharpened the conflict between hill folk and settled cultivators. Now you know beta why name of this topic is the hoe and the plow, because hoe it just denote tribe people of Rajmahal Hills, Paharias people, and plow it denote the settled agriculture. So now there was a conflict between these, and the former began to raid settled villages with increasing regularity, carrying away food grains and cattle. Now beta these Paharias people, these hill folk, they now their raids increased, their attack increased just to take more food grains for them. And colonial officials tried desperately to control and subdue the Paharias, but they found the task difficult. It was difficult for the British people to control these Paharias people. So in the 1770s, the British embarked on a brutal policy of extermination. Beta, what was this policy? Beta, now these British people, they started hunting the Paharias down and killing them. And by the 1780s, Augustus Cleveland, the collector of Bhagalpur, proposed a policy of pacification. Paharias chief were given they just turned up a new strategy. What they did, Paharias chief, they were given an annual allowance. उनको एक annual एक amount pay किया जाता था, and they were responsible for the proper conduct of their men. और जो ये chief होते थे बेटा, उनको they are to control their tribes. And even they were expected to maintain order in their localities and discipline in their own people. अब जो ये tribe chief थे, like they were appointed by the British people. और उनकी what was their responsibility? Just to maintain their people, control their people. And many Paharia chiefs refused the allowances. And those who accepted most often lost authority within the community. और बेटा जो ब्रिटिश के इसको accept कर लेता था chieftain को, and now they were not accepted by their community. So being in the pay of the colonial government, they came to be perceived as subordinate employees. As the pacification campaigns continued, The Paharias withdrew deep into the mountains. But now, like this specification was, these campaigns were increasing, the conflicts were increasing. Then these Paharias, they withdrew deep into the mountains. Earlier they used to live in the surroundings of the hills. Now they moved towards the deeper into the mountains, and they insulating themselves from hostile forces and carrying on a war with outsiders. Now beta, they just isolated themselves from the outside world. And beta, this was the time when Buchanan traveled through the region in the winter, and the Paharias naturally viewed him with the suspicion and distrust. That is why no one cooperated with him. This was the reason. And the experience of pacification campaigns and memories of brutal repression shaped their perception of British infiltration into the area. And every bit, because their strategy, their policies were so suppressive and exploitative for these Paharias people. So every white man appeared to represent a power that was destroying their way of life. Means जो ये पहाड़िया people थे, for them each white people, it was like their enemy, and they just look at them like they are the destroyer of their life and their means of survival. And every white people, they considered like they came there to snatch away their control, forest and lands. So by this time, in fact, there were newer intimation of danger, like Santhals. They were pouring into the area, clearing forest, cutting down timber, plowing land and growing rice and cotton. So as the lower hills were taken over by Santhal settlers, the Paharias receded deeper into the Rajmahal hills. And if Paharia life was symbolizing by the hoe, which they used for shifting cultivation, the settlers came to represent the power of the plow. So this was the way, like name of this topic is the hoe and the plow. And this was the battle between the hoe and the plow was a long one. That these nomads people, these hill people and the settled agriculturists. So hope all of you have understood the topic. Thank you and have a nice day.